Che Guevara's final days are usually remembered in a single frozen image, a lifeless body on a laundry sink in Vallegrande, eyes eerily open, soldiers posing nearby. But behind that macabre tableau lies a meticulous hunt, an operation powered not just by soldiers and guns, but by informants, intercepted messages, and a patient, invisible enemy. How did one of the most recognizable revolutionaries on Earth, expert in guerrilla warfare, end up cornered by a provincial army backed by the CIA? Who betrayed him, and when did the net truly close? In this video, we peel back the legend and reconstruct the manhunt piece by piece, from coded passports and secret departures to suspicious peasants, double agents, and a CIA officer waiting at the end of the road. Stay with this story because the way Che was tracked, trapped, and ultimately silenced tells us as much about Cold War power as it does about Che himself. To understand Che's betrayal, we need to rewind to 1965 to 1966, when the man who helped win the Cuban Revolution began disappearing from public view. Officially, Che vanished into secrecy. Unofficially, intelligence services from Washington to Buenos Aires started asking one question: where is he going next? This video retraces that journey, from the end of his African adventure to the decision to ignite a new FOCO in Bolivia and the quiet alarm bells it triggered inside the CIA. We'll follow the operation from Havana to Prague, from training camps to mountain ravines, and track how every misstep fed information into an ever-tightening net. If you're into deep documented history rather than slogans, you're in the right place. Consider subscribing and tapping the notification bell so you don't miss future episodes, and watch through to the end for a clear breakdown of what we can prove, what's disputed, and what remains in the shadows. By late 1965, Che Guevara was already a ghost in official Cuban media. After his failed attempt to export revolution to the Congo, he resurfaced briefly in secret meetings, then slipped from sight again. In April 1965, he delivered his famous Algiers speech denouncing the Soviet Union. Soon after, he vanished. Western intelligence picked up rumors. Che in Africa, Che in China, Che dead, Che preparing new wars. The CIA's Latin America division kept a running file, collating embassy chatter, defectors' testimony, and intercepted communications. Their analysts understood something crucial. Wherever Che reappeared, he would be a symbol capable of igniting insurgencies far beyond his small band of fighters. In Havana, Fidel Castro publicly read Che's farewell letter in October 1965, announcing he had left Cuba to fight abroad. For the CIA, that speech wasn't theater, it was a warning bulletin. Somewhere Che was moving. The clock on finding him had started. Che's African campaign in the Congo gave the CIA a preview of his post-Cuba methods: small internationalist teams, local recruitment, and strict operational secrecy. But it also revealed his vulnerabilities: logistics, language barriers, and dependence on sympathetic states. After the Congo collapsed into frustration and illness, Che regrouped in late 1965 and early 1966, shuttling through Dar es Salaam, Prague, and back into the socialist bloc's shadows. Czech and Soviet archives suggest he traveled under false identities, sometimes with altered appearance, but he never fully escaped attention. Intelligence services shared fragments, flight manifests, hotel rumors, surveillance photos of a bearded man avoiding cameras. None of it proved a Bolivian destination yet, but patterns emerged. Analysts noted his insistence on rural guerrilla warfare, his focus on the Andes as a continental spine. When obscure Bolivian communists and Cubans started appearing in training environments, a hypothesis formed inside the CIA. The next FOCO might be in Bolivia's forgotten mountains. Bolivia, landlocked and politically unstable, seemed an unlikely stage for global revolution. Yet Che chose it precisely for its geography: a central node bordering 5 countries, highlands where guerrillas could hide, and a weak army with poor morale. In late 1966, under the name Adolfo Mena Gonzalez, Che entered Bolivia disguised as a balding, bespectacled businessman. He shaved his iconic beard, altered his posture, and carried forged Uruguayan documents prepared with Cuban help. For a brief moment, the disguise worked. Immigration officers in La Paz stamped his passport without recognizing the world-famous face behind the glasses. But paper trails are hard to erase. Copies of his entry forms, unusual transit patterns of foreign technicians, and quiet reports from suspicious embassy staff began to stack up. At the same time, local communists were divided about hosting a foreign-led guerrilla. Their internal disputes would become a crucial opening for security services hunting for any hint of Che's presence. Che's guerrilla foco established itself in the remote Nyancahuazú region, a rugged area of southeastern Bolivia. The plan? Train a core group of Cuban veterans and carefully selected Bolivians, then spread insurgency across borders to Argentina, Peru, and beyond. Secrecy was paramount. Radios were limited, couriers trusted, and the camp hidden deep in forested ravines. But from the start, cracks appeared. Che's alliance with the Bolivian Communist Party fractured when party leader Mario Monge refused to fully commit. This political split created disillusioned cadres, ideal recruitment material for informants. Local peasants, far from being a revolutionary base, resented the requisition of food and feared army reprisals. Some quietly reported strange armed men to nearby garrisons. Meanwhile, the CIA and US military advisors were already embedded with Bolivia's government, training special ranger units and encouraging better intelligence networks. The guerrilla camp remained unseen for months, but ghosts were starting to leave footprints in village gossip and partisan rivalries. The turning point in Che's invisibility came through signals, intelligence, and human whispers, not a dramatic discovery in the jungle. Bolivian security services began receiving scattered reports, unfamiliar accents in remote markets, nighttime movements on mule trails, peasants finding propaganda leaflets. The army created a special intelligence unit to consolidate these clues, encouraged by US advisors eager to test counterinsurgency doctrines. The CIA supplied radios, training, and analytical methods, but also leaned heavily on Cuban exiles who knew Che's tactics. Meanwhile, guerrilla operations, ambushes, and skirmishes announced that an organized force was active. Each firefight left behind weapons, documents, or prisoners, feeding more detail into the intelligence picture. Captured diaries and maps were rushed to La Paz and then to U.S. hands. Even before anyone proved Che himself was in Bolivia, his signature style, rural foco warfare, political education, careful discipline, betrayed him. For experienced analysts, it felt like hearing a familiar voice on a scrambled radio channel. As the guerrilla campaign unfolded, mistakes multiplied. Che's group suffered supply problems, illness, and desertions. Several Bolivian recruits lacked deep ideological commitment. Some joined for pay or out of local grievances. Under pressure, a few would become informants. One early blow came when a deserter provided the army with valuable details about the guerrillas' composition and general location. His testimony, combined with captured documents, narrowed the search radius dramatically. Simultaneously, the guerrillas' harsh discipline toward suspected spies and reluctant peasants deepened local fear. Some villagers began quietly guiding soldiers along trails or alerting them when armed men appeared near their fields. These were not always conscious betrayals of Che as a symbol. They were acts of survival by people caught between two armed forces. The CIA understood this dynamic well and encouraged Bolivian officers to cultivate peasant networks with rewards, protection promises, and when necessary, intimidation. By mid-1967, evidence that Che himself was in Bolivia hardened. On March 23rd, his guerrillas ambushed an army unit at Nyancahuazú, killing several soldiers. Documents and eyewitness reports described a foreign commander with asthma and an authoritative presence. Then, a major intelligence windfall. Che's personal diary and other writings were periodically captured in skirmishes, or copies leaked via informants inside the guerrilla support network. These texts, rushed to analysts, revealed his strategic thinking, health problems, and frustrations with local conditions. The CIA, working through its station in La Paz and regional hubs, cross-checked handwriting, code words, and references with earlier Cuban-era materials. Confidence grew that the Bolivian foco was not just inspired by Che, it was Che. This realization elevated the mission from routine counterinsurgency to a symbolic priority. Washington saw an opportunity to remove a global revolutionary icon, while Havana feared a disaster it could no longer fully control or deny. Enter Felix Rodriguez, a Cuban exile and CIA operative whose role would become central in Che's final days. A veteran of the Bay of Pigs and numerous covert missions, Rodriguez was brought in as a liaison and field advisor to the Bolivian Army's elite Ranger Battalion. Fluent in Spanish, deeply anti-communist, and personally invested in defeating Castro's allies, he became the human bridge between U.S. strategic goals and Bolivian boots on the ground. Rodriguez helped interrogate prisoners, analyze captured material, and refine search tactics based on his knowledge of Cuban guerrilla methods. Although the Bolivian military remained formally in command, CIA influence grew through such advisors. Rodriguez later claimed he tried to save Che's life for intelligence value. Others argue he pushed for execution. What's clear is that by the time the Rangers deployed to Che's area of operations, they were fighting not just with rifles, but with a playbook shaped in Langley and honed by men like Rodriguez. The noose tightened through classic counter-guerrilla tactics, encirclement, pressure, and relentless pursuit fed by informants. Bolivian Rangers, better trained and equipped thanks to U.S. assistance, began cutting off food routes and tracking recent campfires. Captured fighters provided more precise information as fear and fatigue eroded their resolve. One striking example was the role of local school teachers, traders, and minor officials who, often reluctantly, reported sightings of strangers or unexplained purchases. Each small tip, mules bought without haggling, medicine requested for asthma, men paying with crisp foreign bills, was logged and mapped. Che's column, weakened and constantly on the move, left a thin trail. At the same time, disinformation and planted rumors forced guerrillas to second-guess their contacts, further isolating them. The CIA didn't need a massive spy network. It needed enough overlapping human and material traces to predict patterns. By October 1967, those patterns pointed inexorably toward a small village called La Higuera. On October 7, 1967, Che's dwindling group stumbled into the Quebrada del Uro, a steep ravine near La Higuera. Exhausted, hungry, and increasingly aware that the army was closing in, they camped in a tactically vulnerable position. Nearby villagers had already informed the military of guerrilla movements. Radio intercepts and ground reports aligned to suggest a decisive opportunity. The next day, Bolivian Rangers launched a coordinated assault, guided by prior intelligence and terrain knowledge. In the chaos of the firefight, several guerrillas were killed, others scattered. Che, wounded in the leg and with his rifle damaged, was captured alive. The soldiers quickly realized whom they had in custody. Helped by prior briefings with Che's photos and biographical details, word traveled swiftly up the chain of command and to CIA operatives nearby. The long manhunt, driven by informants, diaries, deserters, and peasant whispers, had finally delivered its ultimate prize, Che Guevara, disarmed, bleeding, and very much alive. Che was taken to the tiny schoolhouse in La Higuera, where he spent his last night alive. Here, the intelligence operation shifted from hunting to deciding what to do with the captured symbol. Felix Rodriguez and other advisors arrived, questioning Che, gauging his morale, and relaying information to superiors. Accounts differ on the conversations, but most agree Che remained defiant, refusing to renounce his cause. In La Paz and Washington, authorities weighed options: a public trial that could turn him into an even greater martyr, or a quiet execution that erased a problem but raised moral and legal questions. Ultimately, Bolivian President René Barrientos ordered Che's death, a decision aligned with U.S. preferences to avoid a prolonged spectacle. On October 9th, a Bolivian sergeant executed Che with multiple shots, staged to look like combat wounds. Even in death, intelligence considerations dictated details: how the body would be displayed, photographed, and then hidden from potential pilgrimage. Che Guevara's capture and execution in Bolivia were not simply the result of superior firepower or bad luck in a ravine. They showcase how modern counterinsurgency fuses local grievances, human intelligence, and international coordination. Informants ranged from disillusioned militants to frightened peasants. Each acted from personal motives: survival, resentment, opportunity, not grand geopolitical calculation. The CIA didn't orchestrate every move, but it shaped the framework, training rangers, analyzing diaries, embedding operatives like Felix Rodriguez, and helping transform scattered clues into actionable maps. At the same time, Che's own miscalculations mattered, choosing a country with weak party support, underestimating peasant skepticism, and overextending a small force. His myth portrays betrayal as a single Judas moment, yet history reveals a slow accumulation of small, often ambiguous betrayals. Understanding this complexity helps us see past romantic posters to the hard realities of clandestine warfare, where information more than bullets usually decides who lives and who dies. If you've made it this far, you now know that Che Guevara's last campaign was less a clean, heroic saga and more a tangled intelligence drama. The story of how he was tracked and betrayed forces uncomfortable questions. How do ideals survive contact with fear and hunger? When does cooperation with authorities become betrayal, and who gets to decide? And how much of what we call fate is really the result of patient data gathering by unseen bureaucracies? If this kind of deep document-based history interests you, this is exactly the channel to stick with. Subscribe if you haven't yet. Hit the notification bell so future episodes on Cold War covert operations reach you, and share this video with someone who only knows Che from a t-shirt. Drop your thoughts or questions in the comments, especially what angle of the story you'd like to see expanded, like Che's Congo years or the afterlife of his image around the world.